Welcome to the Pit Stop Ranch, where recently we discovered, much to our dismay, that some people think we have a hoarding problem. To them I say, it's only a problem if what you're hoarding doesn't have a use. This video, we're going to talk about this unusual piece of hardware that has absolutely no following. Well, that's not true at all. This is the legendary Ford 9-inch. Now, if you've been following along in the last couple videos, a few videos I should say, going to the various swap meets in the region, I have drug home yet more Ford 9-inch parts. And that brings our total count of 9-inch Ford rear ends up to 6-ish that aren't currently actually in a vehicle. And if you count the one in the Bronco chassis down yonder, that's a 7th, since we might or might not leave that one in there. So why have I begun collecting these antiquated rear ends? What is it about this dinosaur of a bygone era that is so attractive to me that I'm willing to take the unique, not very unique, position that they're worth gathering and setting aside for hypothetical future projects? In this video, we're going to do a rundown on the Ford 9-inch and to tell you why this Detroit classic is such a favorite of mine and virtually all hot rodders the world over, as a choice for delivering the power to the wheels on our classic cars and hot rods. But before I do that, let me do a quick disclaimer. If someone who happens to have in their name Curry or Strange or Quick Performance, and they say something that contradicts any of the things that I'm about to say in this video, odds are they're correct. That said, I've done some research and going to include quite a bit of my own experience playing with these and put together what I have learned over the years about these wonderful and special differentials and axle systems. Now, Ford introduced the 9-inch axle in 1957 for use in their automobiles and light trucks, such as the F100. At the time, cars continued to grow dramatically. They were getting bigger and bigger in size, and therefore weight, and the horsepower and torque of the motors going in them was also increasing, and the classic Ford Banjo wasn't going to keep up. As a stopgap in the F100s, Ford was buying Dana 44s and putting them in to the F100s, but when the 9-inch came out, that all stopped. Anything that they would consider putting in a Ford Dana 44 in got a 9-inch instead. So as a result, they built millions of these things, and for a long time they were plentifully available in the junkyards, so that you could pick and choose the combination of width, brake types, bearing types, gear ratios, axle spline counts, limited slip or open differential. course, times have changed, and if you find a 9-inch in the junkyard, odds are it's going to be like a bare housing. It's not going to be much more than that, because as soon as they go in there, the usual pickers go in and strip them out pretty quickly. Now, in the very beginning, in the earliest examples, they had two flavors. Both use the same center section or third member, and I will be using those terms interchangeably. And housing, however, they used different ring and pinion setups. One was an 8 3/4 inch diameter ring gear, and the other one was a 9-inch ring gear. Fortunately, they're interchangeable, the ring and pinions. Possibly need a different carrier, but the overall interchangeability of them allows you, it's a relatively quick and easy swap to upgrade if you happen to get an early one with an 8 3/4 ring gear to upgrade it to the 9-inch ring gear. So that said, now there's a bunch of different gear ratios available for them. You can look them online as well as I can. They go down the 290, 270 range all the way up to 556s and some pretty crazy levels in between. Okay, this is our axle pile, and in this pile we have 5 Ford 9-inches, and a casual inspection, you will actually notice that for the most part 3 of the 5 are actually the older style, smooth round housing on the back cover plate with a couple of dimples in it. And if you look at the bottom of one, there's a drain plug, which later models did not have. While later models, such as this example here that I drug home from Long Beach, they're scalloped here and here with the off-centered hump right here in order to reduce internal volume, to reduce how much gear oil Ford actually had to install in the factory. And when you're building millions of these at a whack, saving a pint or a quart of gear oil at a time saves money, and we all know they're all about that. And this particular example is a not only is it got this feature on it, but it also has the large bearing ends in bearing pattern. So this is the desirable bearing end that allows you to pretty much put whatever brake conversion kit on you would like. Now, on the early ones, there had and they did a variety, a lot of different bearing packages on the end here. And not all of them are terribly conducive to fabricating or modifying aftermarket. That said, companies like Quick Performance sell a kit that you can cut off the old one, and cut the old one off and weld on this style bearing arrangement and flange setup, so that you can go ahead and do whatever spring or whatever brake package you would like to do that is intended to bolt on or weld in close proximity to this. Okay, I got you in a little closer so you can see this a little better. Ford 9-inch has a straight tube, at least for the most part, along its length. There's a minor step down here, and if that where this step down occurs to fit the end on it varies from different but this is cylindrical and a non-conical all the way to here, and then here to here it is also straight with walls parallel to each other without going in. So that means it's easy to go ahead and cut, line up, and weld a axle to narrow it. This here is an example of a section I cut out of a truck early 70s truck F100, E100 truck, 9-inch that I set up for my 68 Pontiac Le Mans. Now another thing too is with like this example here, we see here some mounting, suspension mounting arrangement was made, and then right here you can kind of see this, these go all the way down back. This is probably where the shock mount was welded to the housing, and here is probably where front suspension components were. I am guessing, and this is purely a guess, that this came out of a car as opposed to a truck, because a truck, it would be a leaf spring perch out on the ends instead of this style. Now the other thing is the this hump here, the center hump, is centered between the ends. So on the trucks, they were usually offset slightly so that the pinion lined up with the transmission output. Where on the cars, because you don't have the elevation difference between the back of the transmission and the front of the pinion, or it's not as severe of an elevation difference, you can offset the center, the pinion center, one way or the other, and not affect drive line angles very much. No more than you would see in a stock pickup truck, let alone something that's lifted with big meats or whatever. So in my 68, I used, like I said, I used a truck rear end. The pinion was centered, so these tubes were different lengths, and so I had to take out a different amount from each side in order to center the center hump, because I needed to put the upper control arm mounts on the center hump like you'd see on a 10-inch or a 10 bolt or a 12 bolt, with the outer mount out lower out here for the lower control arms and the shock mount. So this here, because it's symmetrical, is a excellent candidate for putting in an A body, other than the fact that measuring it out, it would be approximately, if it was complete, wheel mounting surface is approximately 63 inches as opposed to the 60 inches that your stock GM A body rear end is. Now one can argue, okay, what's an inch and a half difference? It means that you could make that up with by playing with the wheel offset or whatever. However, I've got a nice set of factory rallies on there, or knockoffs that are a little wider. They're a nice set of wheels I would like to keep, and they're set in there for the stock length. So if this gets narrowed, or this gets put in the Chevelle and even the Skylark, I will go ahead and take 1.5 inches out of each tube and narrow it up. Now Ford started phasing out the 9-inch in the early 80s in favor of the 8.8, which has become the new darling of the DIY hot rodders and Jeepers, because it has similar strengths, not quite as strong, but similar strengths, and available in a wide variety of widths. There's good support aftermarket. There's a lot of things you can do with it, but it's presently available widespread in the junkyard for cheap. So the 8.8 has gradually replaced the 8-inch for a lot of hot rodders, and it's a good rear end. If you want to run an 8.8, go for it. I will point out a few differences as we go along between the 8.8 and the 9-inch. But one big difference is how the axle is actually retained inside the housing. On a 9-inch, the axle is actually retained by this flange. An 8.8 is a C-clipper end, which means the axle is retained by a C-clip inside the differential on the end. This is an axle shaft out of that truck 9-inch I cut up for my Le Mans. It's 31 spline. It's well used, but it has on the end here, this bearing, the wheel bearing, is actually pressed onto this part of the shaft, and it's got this retaining sleeve or collar that's there to doubly secure it so that it's pressed firmly on and it isn't going to go anywhere, slide out. And then the whole thing is bolted to the end flange of the 9-inch, so the axle is retained inside the housing that way. That is a preferred retention method in most forms of motorsports and racing, at least all the ones I'm familiar with, because on the eventuality you break a shaft, the shaft parts will rattle around inside the housing but remain contained inside the housing. And yeah, you might damage the internals of your axle housing and your differential, but at least you won't have a wheel and an axle shaft go bouncing down the racetrack, potentially colliding with another racer or car or into the spectator stand, and you won't then suddenly fall on one side and drag and spin out and crash and burn to death. So in motorsports, this axle retention system is preferred over the C-clip. Now that said, 10 bolts, GM 10 bolts, which are also C-clip retained, Dana 35s, which were the standard axle in the back of YJ and TJ Wranglers, as well as the Ford 8.8 are all C-clips, and you would need to, if you want to use those rear ends, you will have to do what's called the C-clip eliminator, which sort of mimics this arrangement here. It allows you to go ahead and put an axle retention system on the end and eliminate the need for a C-clip on the inside. Now, some other features of the actual axle shaft itself. On a lot of earlier axles, they would start fat here and taper down a little bit to go to here. On these, the blank is forged straight, or nearly straight. There's a neck down right here, but it's not, but again, like the housing, this is straight section and this is a straight section. So what you could do, what the early hot rodders did if they wanted to narrow one of these things, is they could make a cut, and they could go ahead and turn in a lathe to this diameter. And then if they had a way to cut the splines, which, you know, there's several different ways to do it, and probably the most common would be in a mill, with a milk tool and an indexing table. You could go in and cut the splines into up here in this part of the shaft, and voila, you've got a shortened axle shaft to go into your narrowed housing. So that was a very popular feature as well that the 9-inch had over other axles of the time. Now, if you don't have a lathe or the mill setup or the machine tools required to cut down and respline your own axle, the aftermarket's got you covered. You can buy a aftermarket axle shaft with your choice of bearing setups on the end, large, small, different plates, etc., to fit your intended application. They also come in general drilled with different lug bolt patterns so that you can fit your desired lug pattern. Whether you want to go, you know, you can start like this is having come from the truck, this is 5 on 5.5. So say you want to toss in a Mustang and be able to use this, you want the same lug pattern front or rear, you can then get this get an axle shaft that's drilled for 4.5, 5 on 4.5. Or say, for an example, on my Pontiac Le Mans, my tires are square, meaning the front and rear tires and rims are the same size. So I can rotate them and so forth. And because they're the same size, they have the same lug pattern, and I wanted to maintain that. So when I ordered my aftermarket axles, I got them drilled, had them so that they were already pre-drilled for 5 on 4 3/4, the standard GM Chevy lug pattern for medium-sized cars. So again, if you're like me and you don't have the means to cut and respline one of these, even though it's relatively simple with the right tools, you're covered. You don't have to worry about it. One of the most recognizable parts of the Ford 9-inch is, of course, the center section. The removable third member, whatever you want to call it. Ford did not invent this basic layout, this design. It was actually fairly common design back in the 40s and 50s. And they came relatively late to the game with this particular configuration. And another one of the axles that Ford produced concurrently with this one, that was the stock axle you'd find in Mustangs and Novas and Rancheros and so forth, the small Ranchero, is the 8-inch, which from the outside looks exceedingly similar, unless you see a 9-inch and an 8-inch sitting next to each other, and the size difference isn't overly apparent. It is easy by even nominally experienced people like me to have to sit there and stop and really look at them to figure out if I'm looking at an 8-inch or 9-inch. The easiest giveaway is on the third member here. If this bolt right here, this nut, there's a stud that goes here, much like this, and if it's not a straight shot and it's too much interference that you can't get a socket on this one or this one, you have to use an open-end wrench in order to remove the retaining nuts on these two studs. Then that's a giveaway, it's a 9-inch. If you can get a deep throat socket on them, it's an 8-inch. Easiest giveaway. And here's where I smash my fingers. There we go. And for those of you who are asking, the housing is both easier to grab and lighter than this center section. Now, this here is actually 28 spline. You might be able to read it there. It's a 28 spline section, and my 31 spline truck axles won't fit it. And this is actually another third member besides the one I picked up or the one we already had spare laying around. So, that said, some important features of the 9-inch that make it unique from other differentials. Okay. First, if you notice where the pinion comes in relative to the center line of the ring gear. All right. The Ford 9-inch, the pinion input is much lower, and that is achieved by a much steeper angle on the helical cut for the pinion gear. Now, what that results in is this differential here is that configuration, that design is stronger for the given ring gear size than if the pinion input was up a little higher, such as with the GM 12 bolt, which is always the one that's most compared to the 9-inch. Now, this lower setting and greater strength, why doesn't everyone do that? Well, it comes at a cost, a price. This lower setting results in a 3 to 5% reduction in efficiency, power efficiency, efficiency transfer, which means there's going to be more heat inside the gear oil and the spirited driving, but it also shows up in your overall efficiency of the vehicle. Turn it upside down here. The pinion, end of the pinion, is supported by the housing in this bearing retainer here, bearing cup. This means that it isn't as reliant on bearings over here. It's not cantilevered, so you end up with less potential deflection on between the two gears, resulting in them to separate and changing the load where it's supposed to be on the center or the center face of the gear, and puts it closer to the tip, thereby making it so it's more likely to shear off and break. So again, that's another feature that dramatically increases the strength of the rear end. Now, a nice feature of these center sections, all center sections regardless of the manufacturer, is the fact that you can remove them from the car, you can set them up on the bench, get your bearing preloads for the pinion bearing and the bearing preloads for the carrier bearings, as well as get the teeth alignment where you need it on the bench and not while you're rolling around underneath a car fighting it. The other advantage is, of course, if you can buy multiple center sections, multiple setups like this, and have different setups for your car. Now, going back to unique features of the Ford 9-inch, this here is a locator nut. Here this nut here holds the race in, okay, on this conical bearing. Now, one thing that actually probably my big mistake is these are torqued, but this nut pushes up against the race and sets your preload on your bearing, the conical bearing there. So you bring it in nice and snug, and it pushes that race into the bearing, and that sets your carrier bearing preload. And you just need it, you bring it up snug, and then just a little bit more, and that's all you need. The other thing that does is there's one on each side. So by adjusting one in and out, you adjust the ring gear in and out. This sets your ring gear relative, your depth, your tooth engagement with the pinion, which you then check and measure by the amount of backlash. Now, another feature of the 9-inch, prop this up here, put it thusly, is it has a separate carrier for the pinion and seal, the bearings and so forth. You can you unbolt this cover, pull the whole assembly out, and then take the nut off, and then there's a crush sleeve for tension preload on the bearing, but that setup doesn't necessarily affect, it does a little bit, but you just do it and it gets it close, gets the pinion in and out located. If you need to adjust it, you can put shims in here to increase the out distance. So, in a nutshell, setting up, changing out to a limited slip from the open rear end like this one, open differential like this one, changing ring gear setup, changing the spline count. These are all things someone who's nominally mechanically inclined has the proper information, a book, etc. And just your basic mechanics hand tools can get in and do and set up easily. It's not hard. That said, for its size and compactness, this creates a very strong, very durable setup. Now, from the factory, these came with mostly open. They also had a limited slip. It was a clutch style limited slip, pause traction, true lock, something, I forget. And then an actual locking differential was also an option, I believe Detroit locker. That said, there's a whole bunch of different other traction aids available. You know, spools, so you don't have to try and get in there and weld it up yourself. You can get any number of lockers, selectable lockers. You can get any number of different limited slip configurations, whatever your preference is. And those are all available via the aftermarket. So, why do I covet the Ford 9-inch for my projects? And by extension, why are they such a favorite of hot rodders worldwide? Well, to begin with, as I showed you, you can work on these, you can set up, you can change the gears, you can do a bunch of stuff internally on them with basic hand tools and a little bit of knowledge. Before you do it, do a little bit of reading on them just so you become familiar, so you understand proper gear setup and everything else. But, like I said, which is armed with a little bit of knowledge and some basic hand tools, they're very easy to change and modify internally. With some fabrication tools, you can put on any suspension mounting system your heart desires, so that you can use a 9-inch in just about any application. You're also able to shorten it with those fabrication tools, assuming you want to buy the axles, or if you happen to have even some relatively modest machining capability, you can even take the stock axles, shorten them and respline them yourself. There's a huge aftermarket for these things, including brand new, never been used, complete arrangements available from reputable sources like Curry, Strange, Quick Performance. Furthermore, they also sell all the parts to modify factory production units to whatever specification you're looking to accomplish. Because that aftermarket, because of their design, the way they're assembled, a 9-inch is cheaper to build than equivalently sized strength axles. Anywhere from they're 2/3 to 90% of the cost of building a 9-inch versus something like Dana 44 or a GM 12 bolt, a Chevy 12 bolt. And so there you go. I hope you learned something, or at least were mildly entertained while I discuss why I have arguably unnatural affinity for the Ford 9-inch. If there's something I missed, or heaven forbid I got wrong, please comment below. Let us know what any improved information that you might be having, or share a story of the time you tossed a 9-inch in your 32 coupe. We all appreciate it. That would be wonderful. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe. That is incredibly helpful to the channel and growing our brand, so that we can keep bringing you quality content such as this. Of course, since we are professionals, but not at this, comment on any errors we made, and smash the old like button, hit the notification bell so you get notified the next time we post a video. And until then, ciao.
Breathe. It's an inside